Hey, Squirrel Squad. Here we go. Oh, doggone it. My light went out. Go, bookmark. Go, 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 go.
Tap it.
I did, and it just sits there. There
Hey.
we go. Spooning, spooning. Here's an awful flirtation on the sly, cried Teddy, peering over the fan just at that interesting moment, much to his mother's confusion and his father's amusement, for the professor never was ashamed of the fact that he still considered his wife the dearest woman in the world. Rob promptly ejected his brother. Where was I? Brother. From one window to see him skip in at the other while Mrs. Joe shut her fan and held it ready to rap her unruly boy's knuckles if he came near her again. Nat approached in answer to Mr. Bear's beckoning teaspoon and stood before them with a face full of the respectful affection he felt for the excellent man who had done so much for him. I have the letters ready for thee, my son. They are 2 old friends of mine in Leipzig who will befriend thee in that new life. It is well to have them, for thou wilt be heartbroken with Heimweh at the first. Nat and need comforting, said the professor, giving him several letters. Thanks, sir. Yes, I expect to be pretty lonely till I get started. Then my music and the hope of getting on will cheer me up, answered Nat, who both longed and dreaded to leave all these friends behind him and make new ones. He was a man now, but the blue eyes were as honest as ever, the mouth still a little weak in spite of the carefully cherished mustache over it, and the broad forehead more plainly than ever betrayed the music-loving nature of the youth. Modest, affectionate, and dutiful, Nat was considered a pleasant, though not a brilliant success by Mrs. Joe. She loved and trusted him, and was sure he would do his best, but did not expect that he would be great in any way unless the stimulus of foreign training and self-dependence made him a better artist and a stronger man than now seemed likely. I've marked all your things, or rather Daisy did, and as soon as your books are collected we can see about the packing, said Mrs. Joe, who was so used to fitting boys off for all quarters of the globe that a trip to the North Pole would not have been too much for her. Nat grew red at mention of that name, or was it the last glow of sunset on his rather pale cheek, and his heart beat happily at the thought of the dear girl working ends and bees on his humble socks and handkerchiefs, for Nat adored Daisy, and the cherished dream of his life was to earn a place for himself as a musician and win this angel for his wife. This hope did more for him than the professor's counsels, Mrs. Joe's care, or Mr. Laurie's generous help. For her sake he worked, waited, and hoped, finding courage and patience in the dream of that happy future when Daisy should make a little home for him, and he fiddle a fortune into her lap. Mrs. Joe knew this, and though he was not exactly the man she would have chosen for her niece, she felt that Nat would always need just the wise and loving care Daisy could give him, and that without it there was a danger of his being one of the amiable and aimless men who fell for want of the right pilot to steer them safely through the world. Mrs. Mag decidedly frowned upon the poor boy's love, and would not hear of giving her dear girl to any but the best man to be found on the face of the earth. She was very kind, but as firm as such gentle souls can be, and Nat fled for comfort to Mrs. Joe, who always espoused the interest of her boys heartily. A new set of anxieties were beginning now that the aforesaid boys were growing up, and she foresaw no end of worry as well as amusement in the love affairs already budding in her flock. Mrs. Meg was usually her best ally and advisor, for she loved romances as well now as when a blooming girl herself. But in this case, she hardened her heart and would not hear a word of entreaty. Nat was not man enough, nor would be. No one knew his family. A musician's life was a hard one. Daisy was too young, 5 or 6 years hence, when time had proved both, perhaps. Let us see what absence will do for him, and that was the end of it. For when the maternal pelican was roused, she could be very firm, though for her precious children she would have plucked her last feather and given the last drop of blood. Mrs. Joe was thinking of this as she looked at her Nat while he talked with her husband about Lesbig, and she resolved to have a clear understanding with him before he went. And she was used to confidences and talked freely with her boys about the trials and tribulations that beset all lives in the beginning, and so often mar them for want of the right word at the right moment. This is the first duty of parents, and no false delicacy should keep them from the watchful care. The gentle warning which makes self-knowledge and self-control the compass and pilot of the young as they leave the safe harbor of home. Plato and his disciples approach, announced irreverent Teddy, as Mr. March came in with several young men and women about him. For the wise old man was universally loved and ministered so beautifully to his flock that many of them thanked him all their lives for the help given to both hearts and souls. Bess went to him at once, for since Marmee died, Grandpapa was her special care, and it was sweet to see the golden head bent over the silver one as she rolled out his easy chair and waited on him with tender alacrity. Aesthetic tea always on tap here, sir. Will you have a flowing bowl or a bit of ambrosia? Asked Laurie, who was wandering about with a sugar basin in one hand and a plate of cake in the other, for sweetening cups and feeding the hungry was work he loved. Neither, thanks. This child has taken care of me. And Mr. March turned to Bess, who sat on one arm of his chair holding a glass of fresh milk. Long may she live to do it, sir, and I be here to see this pretty contradiction of the song that youth and age cannot live apart, answered Laurie, smiling at the pair. Crabbed age, Papa, that makes all the difference in the world, said Bess quickly, as she loved poetry and read the best. Crabbed age, what in the world? Wouldst thou see fresh roses grow in a reverend bed of snow? Quoted Mr. March as Josie came and perched on the other arm, looking very thorny little rose, like a very thorny little rose, for she had been having a hot discussion with Ted and had got the worst of it. Grandpa, must women always obey men, as they say they are the wisest just because they are the strongest? She cried, looking fiercely at her cousin, who came stalking up with a provoking smile on the boyish face that was always very comical atop that tall figure. Well, my dear, that's the old-fashioned belief, and it will take some time to change it. But I think the women's hour has struck, and it looks to me as if the boys must do their best, for the girls are abreast now and may reach the goal first, answered Mr. March, surveying with paternal satisfaction the bright faces of the young women who were among the best students in the college. The poor little Atlantis are sadly distracted and delayed by the obstacles thrown in their way, not golden apples by any means. But I think they will stand a fair chance when they have learned to run better, laughed Uncle Laurie, stroking Josie's breezy hair, which stood up like the fur of an angry kitten. Whole barrels of apples won't stop me when I start, and a dozen Teds won't trip me up, though they may try. I'll show him. Let's see what was it. I'll show him that a woman can act as well, if not better, than a man. It has been done and will be again, and I'll never own that my brain isn't as good as his, though it may be smaller, cried the excited young person. If you shake your head in that violent way, you'll addle your brains you've got, and I'd take care of 'em if I were you, began teasing Ted. What started the Civil War? Asked Grandpapa with a gentle emphasis on the adjective, which caused the combatants to calm their ardor a little. While we were pegging away at the Iliad and came to where Zeus tells Juno not to inquire into his plans, or he'll whip her, and Joe was disgusted because Juno meekly hushed up. I said it was all right, and agreed with the old fellow that women didn't know much and ought to obey men, explained Ted, to the giant amusement of his hearers. Goddesses may do as they like, but those Greek and Trojan women were poor-spirited things, as they minded men who couldn't fight their own battles and had to be hustled off by Pallas and Venus and Juno when they were going to get beaten. The idea of two armies stopping and sitting down while a pair of heroes flung stones at one another. I don't think of much of your Homer. Give me a Napoleon or Grant for my hero. Jessie's scorn was as funny as if a hummingbird scolded at an ostrich, and everyone laughed as she sniffed at the immortal poet and criticized the gods. Napoleon's Juno had a nice time, didn't she? That's just the way girls argued, first one way, then the other, jeered Ted. Like Johnson's young lady, who was not categorical but all wiggle-waggle, added Uncle Laurie, enjoying the battle immensely. I was only speaking of them as soldiers, but if you come to the woman's side of it, wasn't Grant a kind husband, and Mrs. Grant a happy woman? He didn't threaten to whip her if she asked natural questions, and if Napoleon did, let's see here, whip her if she asked a natural question. If Napoleon did do wrong about Josephine, he could fight, and didn't want any Minerva to come fussing over him. They were a stupid set, from dandified Paris to Achilles sulking in his ships. And I won't change my opinion for all the Hectors and Agamemnons in Greece, said Josie, still unconquered. You can fight like a Trojan, that's evident. We will be the two obedient armies looking on while you and Ted have it out, began Uncle Laurie, assuming the attitude of a warrior leaning on his spear. I fear we must give it, for Pallas is about to descend and carry off our Hector, said Mr. March, smiling as if Joe came to remind her son that supper time was near. We will fight it out later when there are no goddesses to interfere, said Teddy as he turned away with unusual alacrity, remembering the treat in store. Conquered by a muffin, by Jove, called Josie after him, exulting in opportunity to use the classical exclamation forbidden to her sex. But Ted shot a Parthian arrow as he retired in good order by replying, with a highly virtuous expression, Obedience is a soldier's first duty. Bent on a woman's privilege of having his last word, Josie ran after him, but never uttered the scathing speech upon her lips, for a very brown man in a blue suit came leaping up the steps, and with a cheery "Ahoy, ahoy, where is everybody?" "Emil," cried Josie, and in a moment Ted was upon him, and the late enemies ended their fray in a joyful welcome to the newcomer. And I think I'm going to stop right there because I'm getting sleepy.
Me too.
I read myself to sleep. Look who it is. It's the manager.
You're like already asleep, Granny.
Huh?
I'm like already asleep.
Yep. I've been in there trying to work on my 2020, and I'm like, she's been watching me and her mom's. That's just what I do. I had hoped and prayed that this stuff that I had taken for my thyroid was going to help me. You can put it up there. Be sweet. Don't be ugly. Love to you all. Say bye.
Bye. See you tomorrow.